Thank you. So my name is Ella, and I've been at DARP since January 2021, a little bit before it actually became DARP. And I think I'll give like a little bit of background information about how DARP came to be, and then hand over to Roy to talk about the kind of day-to-day domestic stuff. So DARP really happened as a sort of accident and an experiment, and it's really ongoing improvised work in progress. I actually arrived in the building under the premise of another project, which was a failed residency by another charity. And when I came to this building, it was pretty much an empty school with no residency program or whatever running. And there were a few other very confused people here. And we were basically faced with the question of either we leave or we argue with the company that were running this residency program and just take the building over and try something else. So at a time of radical like digitalization and sort of accelerated social distancing, everyone in the group at the time, there was about 5 of us, thought that it was pretty important and quite a unique opportunity to explore collaboration and commoning in a really beautiful old, albeit falling down building. So the building itself is an old Steiner school. So running in the air of it and in the walls is a history of making and a very specific type of making and learning and nurturing that is really to do with rhythm, nature, the environment, and shapes and people. And it's definitely influenced a lot of the way that DARP has come to be today. It had pretty much been left as it was when the school closed in 2019. So the building is filled with old furniture, with kids' drawings on the desks. There's blackboards in every bedroom. And the only thing that was new was really a couple of showers that had been added by the property company that were in charge of the building, and a few beds. So we pretty much winged it for about 3 months. And we began to turn the space from an empty school into a place for living and practicing. And we all kind of thought that this was really the only right approach to using a building like this, in that we didn't really know what we were doing. We just knew that it was a really great opportunity to collaborate and be in a space like this together as a group of strangers. After about 3 months, we decided that we'd spent enough time together kind of working on this like way of living and practicing together, and we tried to put down into some kind of structure or words what exactly we were doing. So we used one of the old classrooms and used one of the blackboards, and we put together like a bunch of words in a world building exercise to try and describe what we were doing in a pretty loose way. And we ended up with this collaboratively designed identity. And the words that we decided to use were DARP is an open system for living and practicing together. We hope to welcome people of all disciplines and all backgrounds. We came up with some aims to nurture a place for co-creation, autonomy, and experimentation, to transform and regenerate this empty school and its grounds, to breathe life into something forgotten, to work with an abundance mindset, that is to understand that there is enough time, space, resources, and love to go around. And we set a little intention with with very much in mind that this space is an evolving space and really relies on whoever comes into it. So our only intentions were for DARP to be replicated by other people, transplanted, uplifted and disturbed, intending to accommodate to the basic needs of the group and to remain flexible, that is to bend and shapeshift with each resident's arrival. And these words are actually due for a revision, so they might be different in a few months' time. But that's what we came up with at that time. So you'll notice that we tried to keep everything quite granular and open. Our precarity in this space being quite a major factor in how we kind of thought about the project, knowing that we were only going to be in the building temporarily and that it could be taken away from us at any point. And also that because of the kind of people coming in and out all the time, that it really had to be a space that accommodated flexibility and openness. So we decided to make decisions using sociocracy, which basically means that we meet every Monday. And if someone has a proposal of something that they would like to change or something they would like to add to the system that is DARP, then they propose it, and actions are made basically through consent of all participants in the group. So instead of a voting system, everyone has to give their consent, which means that everyone in the group has a kind of equal equity in how DARP runs and what it is basically. And alongside that, there's also an understanding of each person having their own body and their own practice and their own sense of autonomy. But as a group of people living in a building together, we also have shared practice, which is very much tied to our domestic life. So our environment becomes our shared body. So our shared practice stems from this sense of do it together domestic celebration. And people at DARP have, in all the different iterations it's had, have come from lots of different practices and backgrounds. People who work in food, choreography, costume design, people who work for charities organizing, people who work for XR, people who are curators. And it's really the kind of multiplicity of people that come into the space that shape kind of what the project is doing at the time. Our daily practice kind of bleeds experimentation, ritual and performance with our everyday life, and acknowledging what we as a group of people in a space can do together, sometimes lending ourselves out into the rest of the world, and being adaptable, I guess. And this is an advert for a use that DARP could be, which is sort of a crowd hire to anyone in the local area. We haven't actually got a job yet, but we have an application for someone who's running lucid dreaming workshops. So yeah. We've also worked on exhibitions together, taking this kind of do it together domestic celebration out into the local city of Derby, and Art Corps also doing things from our own home, like running film festivals, throwing parties, running a dinner, opening up to previous students and teachers of the school. And yeah, we've had commissions from galleries to make flags, and always kind of respecting this idea of autonomous making in the space of a group as well. So I guess I will leave soon to let Roy take over to speak about a few more aspects, but I guess I'd like to leave with the thought that I was kind of introduced to this conference and to talk about theories of commoning, or the theory of commoning, and I think theorizing commoning is quite a difficult thing to do, because it's much really and kind of like embodied practice. And I mean, in particular from DARP, it really relies on who's involved and people coming in and out, and that being a really flexible thing. So instead of it kind of being theorized in a really sort of strict or structured way, the only thing that we're really inflexible about is the flexibility of the project. And yeah, that kind of being the basis. So yeah, Roy, if you'd like to
switch this around so I can see my head. I'm Sean, but I'm also Roy. Cool. Can you see my head, Ella?
Yeah.
Cool. So Ella's just going to carry on with the carousel. I'm not really talking about any images in particular. More wanted to take from the macros of the project towards the micros, just thinking more about the everyday operations, what it takes to co-design something that is very much based in a transient space, that has no real longevity, and also is in need of sort of multiple inputs in order to survive, really. And so, yeah, for me, like, yeah, I covered a lot of it really, really well. And there's also some really great things that some of the other speakers today were talking about, in particular, like commoning as a verb, and they're doing together the sort of relinquishing control, sort of in terms of like individual agency, relinquishing that in order to allow chance and serendipity to come into the picture and to help co-create something that's maybe unplanned or maybe amorphous that then comes into focus. So that's a really important way that we both make decisions and also design the everyday in terms of being proposal led. So this idea of coming to the table with a proposal and having it, you know, workshopping it and then presenting it as an idea for an event together, or a meditation, or a party, or something like that. And so there's this lean into personal agency and self-organizing, self-determining the things that you want to see in the project, and that becoming part of the makeup of how we do things. And so, yeah, self or co-determination, self or co-organization, and self or co-design are very much all parts of this project. And as Ella said, it's very short term, it's a guardianship. We don't have any control over what happens to the building next or when we get kicked out. And actually, this is I think it's a really significant opportunity to resist institutionalizing what DARP is, resist the becoming rigid and turgid, and actually focusing on the everyday harmonious nature of like eating, napping, walking, creating, watching, listening, talking. And these are very much the sort of verbs, the doing words that throughout history, the proletariat have very much moved around. And in particular, food, I think, is really important at DARP. There are some images of food things that we have done over the past months, and as well as having our own personal space to live, this private space where we have rooms bigger than an entire flat that I lived in once. We also have lots of common space, kitchen, we have a cinema room, we have a meditation room, we have huge school playgrounds. And so it's thinking about how we can share those spaces while satisfying our own needs, but also being mindful of the needs of others and making sure that all of our basic needs are met. Especially somewhere that's rural, semi-rural, it's quite far from the station. There's not a huge amount of stuff culturally going on in the area. It's pretty conservative around there, but there is a huge country park, so we do have lots of access to green space, which is a huge privilege for us as well. The slowness and the DIY ethics are prevalent throughout the project. In particular, I like to think about how at DARP we are presenting not a fixed monolithic idea of what an alternative future is, but we're just offering one possible alternative that is relative to the situation that we're in, the people that are in the space, the materials that we have, and the space that we are inhabiting. And because of this lack of need to institutionalize, there's a freedom, a liberty to focus more on the smaller interpersonal relationships, the support and care, not only for the other humans, but also the non-humans, all the plants, the bugs, the ladybirds, the spiders, the trees. So we have more space and time to explore the ecological makeup of the site, not necessarily to intervene with it, but just to appreciate it. And we've just set up a hot tub in the garden, which is very, very easy. Someone picked up an old bathtub from an allotment. I dug a hole, I put a fire in it. There you go, that's a hot tub. And yeah, so food in particular is something that we comment around. I just want to read a very short diary entry that I wrote last year. I kept a diary every day when I moved to DARP from London, and I can share a link later. There's like excerpts on this website. It just shows the transformation of my being, the moving from quite a solitudinal existence to something that's very joyous. So I wrote on Thursday, 8th of April, this is last year. Ad hoc common meals are breathing life into dead systems shaped by individualistic food culture. Relinquishing personal ownership over ingredients, recipes, and equipment engenders the spirit of co-creation and builds trust and kinship with plants, spaces, and each other. We are working on commoning our pantry, gleaning surplus from local farms, foraging abundant flora, and scavenging from bins in order to diversify our diets and support alternative flows of materials. Bin quiche, surplus parsnip chips, garden nettles, shop pickles, combo salad. So we have a pantry, and we also get surplus from a local farm who I did a little bit of volunteering at, but it's the relationships that we've made with people in the area are very much based on their relationship with the school before we were there. So because the area is quite conservative and quite individualistic, actually we use the Facebook network to reach into the Michael House supporters group, I think they're called, or friends of. And in this way, we were able to connect with ex-teachers, ex-students. We've opened up our doors for tours. We've helped some people on projects. We've stored some stuff for people. We've redistributed some of the old furniture to people who are in need. And the next thing that we're going to do is an exhibition in May that I'm going to curate in the grounds, mostly DARP artists, present and past, but also a few friends of. and I'm gonna frame it by doing like a community meal at the local parish the week before to get people signed up, and then we're going to do tours around the grounds with this exhibition like in it, so it's kind of a stealth exhibition, but it's going to be fun. Yeah, we had 125 eggs. I don't know. Yeah, do you think I've covered everything, Ella?
I think so. Yeah, I guess if anyone has any questions, there's so many different parts of this project, so it's a little bit difficult to condense into a small amount of time, but yeah.
Very fluid and it changes every day, and the idea of having the Monday meeting,
yeah,
very small amount of form to something that is otherwise quite formless. Like I rarely know what day it is, and that's actually fine. Like I'm, you know, in terms of being outside of normally functioning society, it's actually a really good opportunity to try and build other ways of coexisting, you know, sort of beyond the work week, beyond the sort of reliance on dependence on institutional food, and also like entertaining ourselves is a big part of it as well. You know, like it's very slow and quiet there, so rather than just throw parties all the time, we really have to be quite creative with how we keep each other entertained. We've just started doing a structured day, which is more like a regular working day, like a sort of 9 to 5 style with some breaks that I did at Drysdale recently. That's really useful because time is just soup at DARP. So having this thing where we're like, okay, 9 o'clock we start work, 11 o'clock we have a tea break, 1 o'clock someone's cooked lunch, blah, 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 blah. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it also just, the structure of it just changes as soon as like different people come in. And like if you have people who are, I don't know, like for instance, we had one called Paula Ersman come in, who's an artist and works with food a lot as well. And like during that time we did so much more like collaborative food stuff, because that's kind of like what she was interested in. And we made these like huge bread sculptures and like candy with like letters on and stuff. And so the rhythm of it just really changes depending on who comes into the space and like what their like cares and interests are. But there's definitely kind of like there has been like the same group of people, maybe like a core group of people who've been there for like a few months now, that that has its own kind of slow pace as well. So it's this sort of balance between people coming in and then people who've also been here for like a year or so.
Yeah. I think what's super interesting about it as well is that every time someone new comes around, whether they're staying or whether they're visiting, the whole place comes back into focus and becomes refreshed.
Yeah.
It's like reinvigorated with fresh eyes, so it kind of never gets boring. And to a degree, there might be a sense, I can't speak for myself, like some days I wake up and I realize that I take it for granted that we live in a bizarre capsule, and so it's a really good opportunity to like stop and like reflect and consider what it is that's important and how can I meet my basic needs and what do I do with all that surplus. You know, we're talking about abundance, and that's basically everything on top of am I fed, am I watered, am I entertained, am I, you know, do I feel supported, have I got a comfy bed, and everything else is then what we can share with each other. And even when we've had COVID outbreaks in the house, it's very much been like just cooking extra portions and dropping it off. And I would never have had that if I lived in my old flat in London. I would have been really screwed. So yeah, it's kind of an unspoken commitment to towards like supporting the group as a series of individuals, but also as a project that has an end and may live on in other formats. Yeah.
And that actually that's why she's here.
I guess that's why, yeah, we like when we came up with this like collective identity or like trying to describe what it was, we really steered away from, yeah, words like residency or like house or anything that was kind of tied to like this building, because I think like for our own like sanity and also like kind of security, kind of like acknowledging the precarity of it, but at the same time, like, yeah, this idea that it's like a practice that can be taken on into like all other things that happen in the future in your life, and like whether that's like we move into another building as DARP, or like we don't find another building but people splinter off into like different places in the world. There's this kind of like shared practice that we've all experienced and like worked on that system.
Awesome. I think, Joe, did you want to add?
I just wanted to say that one thing that seems quite topical with the talks today is that we've been having recent discussions, especially in light of this situation in Ukraine, where we've kind of said, like, what can we do to use like our space and our like group to be able to support like different causes or like ongoing things that are happening in the world, whether that be like local in our area or supporting groups that are working overseas. And obviously the main thing that stopped, I think, the group kind of doing that in the past is the difficulty of like not knowing when we might leave the space, as Ella said. It's like kind of, it's like a month's notice. It's like, yeah. So we're kind of looking at potentially like hosting refugees coming over, but then there's difficulties there with like not being able to provide like a long-term commitment. But we've just got this huge space, and we've got like a big theatre, like there's all sorts of rooms there that maybe aren't reaching their full potential in terms of like how much we could do with them, how rural it is. So we've been speaking about, one idea that we came up with was starting to kind of like hire out the rooms, like it's like arts groups, or you know, people wanting like locations for like making music videos, or like DIY spaces, things like that. People who are looking for some just kind of like a different setting, and using that to raise money for like a different charity or something like each month. And I think like this kind of workshop is really great because like we can, like Meta Lab, who were just talking, like it's giving us some ideas of like groups that we can support. But yeah, if anybody has, having seen what you've seen, any ideas of how we can support like any of the projects that you guys have going on, or we're really like open to ideas, and yeah, we'd love to hear that. Whether that be now or if you want to like kind of get in touch. And that's something that we just started talking about, so I think our ideas of that will evolve in the coming weeks.
Yeah, I think it took like a long time to kind of like establish how to be in the space. Like it really took like a year of trial and error. And I think now that seems to have kind of like settled in a way, or like we've reached a rhythm that it seems to be kind of easier to start thinking about like how to open it up more.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, Ella.
Thank you.
I think we might have some questions. I'm just going to put you on a big screen. Oops. Cool.
And can I ask? Yeah, that was really brilliant. It's lovely to see like the imagery, like the art looks amazing. You know, yeah, it really, like, yeah, aesthetically, kind of just in terms of the consistency of like the way of living in relation to the creation of the artwork. It's really stunning. I think it's like quite moving to, you know, there's like really important artwork at a really important time. My main thoughts and my main question when seeing this is kind of like the governance stuff and kind of the reality of like, say for example, you mentioned two words of like open and system, and like inside, you know, certainly many major theorists around kind of open systems have kind of postulated that all systems are closed systems, in the sense they work for a particular function or particular people, and that's something that's really prevalent in kind of cybernetic theory, and ideas around a viable system. So a viable systems model by Stafford Beer, who spoke a lot about that, which is kind of like increasing in popularity at the moment. And another interesting thing is like the viable system, or the systems diagrams you showed aesthetically look quite similar to that. So I'm not sure where maybe you referenced that and kind of disembarked from it, or you've got a new take on that. But also the kind of idea of sociocracy, and within that context, sociocracy, from, you know, for me, I've had varying successes and failures with the implementation of the sociocratic system. And just personally speaking, some of the ideas of sociocratic system, the idea that it emerged from, say, it emerged from the Quaker school of thought. The current sociocratic system originally kind of emerged from, you know, almost a completely different field entirely, in French kind of form, which is completely different from the sociocratic system we find today. So there's like a few different versions of sociocracy that people talk about and think about first. So there's this kind of thing that sociocracy isn't necessarily the most agile, adaptable, and fluid system. It's actually at odds with some of the things you were saying about fluidity, which kind of makes me think: are there some integral contradictions in form, or are they just seasonal differences that maybe one season you start to have a sociocratic system, the next season you kind of like have a kind of a more fluid system or a dynamic system, or maybe you have a viable system where you have to engage with an environment outside of the residency. Like, they're my thoughts from seeing those diagrams, because I just picked out a lot of contradictions and complexity there that maybe is kind of something you're exploring as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think the contradiction is kind of at the center of this project, because I think, yeah, to try and be like an open system that's also kind of like is trying to run cohesively in some way, and then also this idea of sociocracy, all kind of being like a little bit at odds of each other. I guess all of that kind of like structural, like theoretical system-based stuff is really like a starting point for us to kind of like experiment with ways of being. And I think like we're really not a group that would maybe sit down and like really understand like the theory of like sociocracy from its like Quaker background, but instead kind of like looking at how sociocracy works in terms of like decision making, kind of like only, and just like applying that on like kind of case by case basis when it seems appropriate, and yeah, trying to keep it flexible. It is like really contradictory, and it is obviously like difficult to try and like accommodate to so many different people in one space. But probably the main the main like thing that we stick to is just I guess like speaking and listening to each other. And if it seems that, I don't know, like, yeah, something isn't working, or that these like these systems of like governance are contradicting like how we think we should be running, then it's not really something that we hold on to. But yeah, does that, I think I kind of understood your question, but does that kind of
So it's like, of styles of organising.
I'll add a little bit to that as well.
Yeah.
Because we run everything based on opting in. So the idea is that there's, just because you're at DARP, there's, apart from like a Monday meeting and cleaning, there is really no social obligation to take part in anything that we do. And I think that's a really important way of organising, so that no one feels pressured to be part of something that they don't want to be, but then it also gives very much the option to be in the places that you want to be in the conversations that are important to you. And you know, even if you're not there in person, we can always arrange Zoom-ins. And also in terms of like sociocratics, it's, I don't know fully about the whole process, but it's definitely it feels like a launch pad for more of a equitable way of making decisions together. And the thing that maybe we struggle with actually as a group of individuals, which is ever transforming, ever moving in numbers and in personnel, is actually accountability. It's something that we have had some conversations about, but I think it's just one of those things that we'll always be chasing our tail with it. And so in terms of if things aren't happening, how do we deal with the things that aren't going so well in an organization that is often, that is very much based on trust, on this kind of abundance mindset, on this idea of like temporary harmony. How do we go about distributing accountability? And that's not something that we have an answer for. And maybe we'll never get there, but the point is that we're trying together in this, in this very flexible, transient space, and we might come up with it, or it might lead on to some other, some eventual resolution. But
I think it's really like a sandbox almost for like trialing lots of different ways to do things, because the accountability thing is really difficult to like trial out and think of.
I mean, as a group that has been organized for 40+ years, accountability is a thing that we still struggle with a lot as well.
Yeah.
Like rather we get needed to make a lot of our decisions, and we base it also on consensus. A group of around 100 to 200 people.
wow.
So one huge thing that we have an issue with is so each country has sort of people who are responsible for maintaining the organization in their country, and that's picked based on, it's opt-in also. You get asked to do it, and if you want to do it, you choose. But even then, sometimes there is accountability issue. For 40+ years, every single time we meet, we have a conversation about what do we do in a situation where there are people who have opted in but aren't like coming true. And sometimes we've come to the conclusion where it's not always an issue of a person not doing it because they don't want to, but it turns out to be resources, difficulties in different socioeconomic situations, and sort of like communication for us, which is a big thing. We are like very spread out, and we have a lot of platforms for communication. So that meeting of 100 to 200 people, it's really useful. And while we sometimes ask ourselves the same questions, we have been generating, I think, points as to why, like the why as to why some countries sort of get left behind, or some countries perform at such a greater like scale than others. Definitely something that.
How many people are in the organization?
So it's huge. So self is an event that's usually between 400 to 600 people.
Oh my god, okay.
Over the full it's thousands.
Most stuff, a lot of people.
Were you going to say
Probably close to tens of thousands.
Yeah, tens of thousands.
People have gone through EASA, and you'll find many people like Florian, it turns out, who was a university tutor. Many of the radical theories that are kind of in university and things have been through EASA or engaged with EASA at one point in time, and it's kind of surreal how many people you find dotted around the place that are kind of like EASA, and everyone, it's pretty fascinating, really. But it is a very good example of so with the consensus in the answer, the thing to point out is not everything's made in consensus. You see, so what happens is consensus around where, kind of where, you know, who's going to do it next, and then the whole community believes in that group, you know, to just do it. Whatever they propose, it's like, is this proposal the right one? Everyone goes, debates it hotly for 2 weeks, and then if, you know, once that proposal goes through, the team are then like the responsible team, everyone trusts them completely with it. Whatever they want to do, how they manage it is up to them then. And that happens once a year. And that's kind of like a nice way of mitigating that like over management of consensus that can kind of like cripple artistic merit. Yeah, it's like, wait a second, like, you know, people are creative, so they do need a bit of social license to like change their mind and do things their way and something like that. So there's an element of kind of like how that.
Yeah, it's about putting support and trust in the community and whoever proposes the idea. And it's not a conclusion that is arrived to very quickly at all. We do debate it and talk about it and really consider it.
I think one thing I'd say about DARP, so like it's obviously a much smaller group than that, so it's less restricting to have that like that kind of system, but quite supportive of kind of like neurodivergency and people like having different needs and having different like levels of commitment that they can offer and things like that. And given this fact that it is also people's home, it's not just a space for practicing. So that's kind of like also a factor that you're not just, it's not just something outside that you're committing to, it's something that you're committing to as part of like your daily life. So it's I think that allows for like more to.
Yeah, I think that the fact that DARP is so small is kind of like what like kind of makes it okay that we run with a lot of contradictions and kind of being more flexible, because you really can't scale it up for this kind of project where you're all living together. It just wouldn't work, because you just don't have enough time to listen to that many voices, like actually listen to them. So I think, at least that's my impression.
Interesting as well, the sort of public element that got like this idea of like being this sort of closed community for some parts of the way that you run, and opening up your doors to the public, or like opening up like shares, like give people feeling shares. That like, it's interesting. It's like rhythm, like when you like
if we let everyone that knocked on our door in when they knock on the door, we just wouldn't get any peace. So it's very much. I know when Ella and I were both there at the beginning of last year, it's like every other week, like every other day, someone would be knocking on the door like, "Oh, I used to go to this school. Like, what's happening here?" And then we figured like people actually really want to see what's inside. They also know now through word of mouth or through us being in the forums who we are and roughly what we're doing. So opening up is like a chance for them not only to like reconnect with some of their former memories and like some of the places that they actually spent a lot of years, but also to see that us as like custodians or like stewards of this space before it gets turned into something horrid, we're trying to engender and like embolden some of those original like Steiner principles, both in the elaborating on aesthetics of the space in terms of our own work, but also like some of the more interesting ways of like co-organizing and co-designing. I think like letting people in is really interesting, but it's got to be on our terms, with anything. It can't be like a free for all.
I guess the kind of thing you do have is a kind of a consensus, or at least a strong consent around is like the fact that everyone's making art and media, and like kind of the visual styles of the art you're creating, it seems to be quite consistent. Is that a cultural kind of like thing? Is that just because you're living in close proximity, or is that a kind of like a decision that has been taken? How does that emerge? Consistency of the visual imagery that comes out of art.
I think it's really improvised. or I mean, when we made the flags, we kind of looked at references together of things that we liked, but I don't know, at least in my experience, it feels like the cohesiveness kind of comes from maybe like reflecting a lot of like what the space is, and then, or like the kind of like influence of living in like a Steiner school with these like Lazur walls and stuff, as well as it just, yeah, kind of being living together and being with each other all the time. I think the other thing that's really important is there wasn't so much of it in here, but yeah, everyone has their own practice and their own work, like looks very, very different from like the work that we make together. And the things that we've made together, they've kind of just bubbled up like as a sort of like improvised thing, like jam almost. And I think, yeah, the cohesiveness hasn't come from us being like, okay, we're going to like make this like style, but just that that kind of naturally happens when you're living together and working together, and you, I don't know.
Yeah, it's like a accidental congruence.
Yeah.
And also because we realise that there's an abundance of materials on the site already, so it's very much not really about bringing loads and loads more stuff on, but more about like reflecting and reusing some of the stuff that's already there. And also with in terms of like the actual detritus, the debris of the school is still very much apparent and consistent. So it's hard to know like where Michael House Steiner School ends and DARP begins. Like, yeah, they're just like kind of one and the same. And that also links to maybe the idea of the organisation of DARP being the people rather than, or the people in the place. But if you take the people away, you then just have a empty, rotting school again.
But maybe it's because it's like sensitive to people, like sensitive to the environment, and things like that.
It takes a certain type of person to live in a dilapidated.
Yeah.
I think are finally understanding that. So we actually have some political leverage with them in the sense that we can kind of break a lot of the rules that they put upon us, because there is no way that they would find anyone suitable to move into the school. Their best idea was spare room, and you've got to be pretty unhinged. That you found on the spare room. So our the way that we recruit is through our own network, our extended network, and we don't put out open calls because we don't want all that admin of looking through 100 applications for one room. So it's quite a tight network, and it kind of works on this scale. It's maybe seen as nepotistic, but it also makes perfect sense because people are ready to move in. You know, we're not kind of waiting around and doing lots of like unnecessary emotional labour.
But before it became DARP, it was advertised by a arts charity in London as an eco-syntax residency. So a lot of the people who applied to come to this old ad, we still have like, you know, contact with some people like that, but so a lot of work was focused on ecology, like the environment and stuff like that. So that's why maybe this is something like themes and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, can you see the photos still?
Sorry, I put your face big.
What?
Yeah, cool. Keep going. Quicker.
No. I was just gonna say. So like this photo, for instance, isn't actually like our work. It's the work from like students at Nottingham Trent University, and I think it's like a workshop that we ran, but the workshop was really, really like loose, and it was like we basically did like a kind of group grounding exercise, and we asked people to think about like cares and what's important to them, and then gave them like 10 minutes to make a representation of their cares, like a little sculpture out of like all these like random materials that we collected. And I think like it's kind of like a good example of like how it kind of like looks really visually cohesive, but it wasn't any of our work, and we didn't put any kind of like aesthetic control onto the students aside from kind of like providing really basic materials, which is, I think, happens when you're in this like bubble and you're using similar materials, that you kind of end up like echoing and like yeah, collaborating with each other, making things that look similar.
Also related to images, I guess that it's just amazing, this idea of practicing everything you do is practice. In a way, it feels almost like, it's almost like a prototype to what life could be if, like, all things that you described, like that idea of money and the space and period, like what we could all live in. And I guess that I'm wondering about how you document, how you translate. Obviously, you know how things work, so you're in it. Tell us a bit about it. And we see the images you've taken. I wonder how fragile it is to document this everyday practice of living. Because the moment you start to document it, it becomes more practice and it becomes alive. But equally, it's such a precious thing that you kind of, especially when you know that it's a guardianship, I'm just like really curious how you balance those two things.
Sorry, I didn't really hear much of that.
The question was, how do we document what we do without knowing that it's going to end shortly, and so that it's quite fragile?
How do we document it?
Yeah, and like, what is it important to document it?
It's important.
Yeah, I mean, we actually didn't, we only got Instagram like end of last year or beginning of this year. So we were running for basically like a year before we even decided to put things online. Like people were just documenting things on their like personal Instagrams or whatever. I guess like it kind of became more important when we started thinking about like, if we wanted to do a project like this again, it would obviously really help to have documentation for funding, or like to show people like what we've done so far. And then I guess also to like share it with people who maybe haven't come across a project like this before, and I don't know, like show the possibilities of like what it could be, what it could be like. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess we can't be too prescriptive about how it's perceived either, because then we end up putting way more admin work into trying to explain exactly what it is that we do. Like, we've just spent an hour and we've only just scratched the surface. You know, it's very hard to describe exactly what happens there. And so in the same breath, maybe it's the sort of maybe the mystery, or maybe the slipperiness of it, you know, the way that the edges of things and things coming into focus and laying back into the background. I think that's maybe more important. So the feeling that I've got through a lot of the other talks as well is these kind of actions, these methodologies, these ways of working that are process-based, that are person-based, rather than the idea of having solidified outcomes. How can we have solidified outcomes when we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, next week, next month? And so DARP is like actually like a really interesting live, like breathing version of that. Like, why would we need to institutionalize to solidify our future when we know that we actually aren't going to have one? And does that mean that looking at the microcosm of it, like the everyday, the moments between each other, are these more important as a way of taking the feeling of the project forwards, rather than each photograph that we create, you know?
Yeah, I think you're right as well, because like nowadays doing life is things quite special, so they're not doing them always with the intention of like, we must post about this or whatever, and it becomes something quite different to our living. So.
I guess you decided to have an exhibition, so I guess that also raises questions about what you make this for, how you.
I guess there's a kind of bigger part of the question, maybe, which is like your collective life becomes an artistic practice, and then within that, how do you then decide what becomes physical, what becomes what can only be understood through kind of that lens. Not expecting an answer. I'm sure that'd be
Yeah, no,
I'm sure
it's really
each of you
interesting.
will have a different
Yeah,
answer. Usually each of you have different answers.
Mhm.
what lens? Sorry,
This slightly self-indulgent. My PhD research is looking at artist-led housing, so organisations that will open-ending houses. I was looking at a group called East Street Arts, artist households and five. My interest that there was, well, my argument was you can't really understand projects unless you follow them. And to follow them, you've got one way follow. I understand the culture associated with it.
yeah. We did have recently actually had like a journalist come. Was originally going to stay the night and just spend the day and try to experience it a little bit. But I think even that you need a bit longer to actually. But some of the writing that you've done, Roy, for example, there's like a Substack on our website that's where people contribute like blogs, and some of the writing that you did that I read before I came was really special in the way that it described just like the daily living and the change that is from the rest of the outside world, I guess. So that in itself, I guess, is like ethnographic.
I think it's like capturing multiple moments without placing any specific grandiosity on one. I don't think there's like a single image that could really encapsulate DARP, and I think that's important that we lean into that. Like it's more of this amorphous thing, it's fleeting, and embracing the sort of chaos of it is actually not only quite creatively liberating, but also can really provide it, for me personally, like a deep philosophical shift in terms of like the way that I want to live my life and actioning and practicing things in this space that will inevitably lead on to other experiences.
I'm interested in the word media as like dark media. So like
Don't read into it too much. That's just for the
that is for the media.
Yeah, that was a kind of joke, because when we did this like initial world building exercise, we were sort of joking that we're having to do like sort of like marketing exercise for something that really didn't really make any sense. So we thought we'd just play on the idea of being a media agency.
I think that,
What?
like when you go, this is almost like the media of this kind of like other life, other life. It's I think it's really like legible that that's what's going on. It's kind of nice to acknowledge that that's a kind of a thing. I guess that's one of the things that separates this kind of activity from something like Morning Star in the 1960s or 70s. Morning Star Crescent in the and that this now is that like there is a new age of media. We're in a different way. Like before, we had centralized television and kind of like people trying to escape television and like people trying to escape that culture completely. But now there is distributed media, and like you can document, you can create new languages for different people, and like maybe it's maybe it is evil, but maybe
Softly.
Yeah, softly. You can use it in a non-evil way sometimes.
Or from maybe like an outside perspective, that critique by putting media actually feels quite like serious. You are actually showing something.
It's a very curated. It's quite obviously a curated version of what it is. Because you can't. It's not like we've got 20. It's not like you're watching live penguins at the zoo. It's like,
but it's nice to be theatrical, because when you're theatrical, it's like that that's the thing, and everyone else on the other side is like, they're doing something theatrical, like, you know, because they know, you know, it's playing on the kind of like irony of the whole thing. Like, it's
That's
good.
maybe the performative that you were talking about. It's the way that we post about it is very much like photos that we've, you know, done with a nice camera, like posed things. Not always, but sometimes.
Yeah,
Maybe,
yeah.
maybe that's the way that people get
Well,
are looking.
Instagram is quite performative, I think. So
Oh, yeah.
it is a performance. Everything.
Yeah. It's in, yeah, I think it's more interesting to be aware and work with, you know.
But I think in a way, like we were having a discussion recently, very like meta kind of discussion about whether life is performance and all of this sort of thing. But it gets a bit like just go around a bit. But like, I do think like in a certain respect it is performative. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but you like when you live in a certain way, you are trying to perform to some kind of, and through that you learn, and that's kind of how our conversation concluded. But yeah, we were kind of saying like, is it actually so bad to like be performative and open yourself up to like different ways of living? And I don't know.
Being walking contradictions.
It doesn't mean it's insincere, no.
We brought the learning.
Yeah.
Well, I was wondering whether you see the space for yourself, you in the space is continuing it as a space of learning.
Students are always students. Yeah, it's ironic that like we're kind of learning and unlearning things and living in school and classrooms doing this. So I think that that's like really it. Also, I'd love to read about your PhD in something. That'd be great.
Come and visit DARP as
I'd
well.
love to.
So this is great segue into our next. So well, let's
Thanks, Ella.
Let's
Yeah,
thank
good job.
you and
Thank you.